Finally, we want to talk about how these signal systems are used. What's the point of knowing about the signal systems if we don't know what to do with them? They're very helpful to us in multiple ways. You see, these signal systems are the primary materials of communication. We shape and manipulate them in order to share our human experience. So, for us, global Christian worship and witness is always done based on the 12 signal systems. If we fail to use the signal system in a way that's appropriate and understandable to the audience we want to reach, we fail to create understanding and active engagement, which is so critical for communicating well, for fostering dynamic, meaningful relationships. I cannot talk about this enough. If we don't know how to use the signal systems in appropriate and understandable ways, we're in trouble. And miscommunication and anger and difficulties can emerge out of it. So, the signal systems then, we want to say, are the observable parts of culture. Being able to identify them and how they are used is a very useful framework for learning to function in a new culture and also being aware of how we are functioning in our own cultures, and especially when we're functioning in multicultural context, because we each bring a different set of cultural dynamics, expectations, and meaning to worship and witness, or whatever and however we are communicating. So, this includes preaching, storytelling, or writing, or drama, art, and music. These all can be effectively used in another culture only by using the signals in a way that is accepted by that culture. Sometimes we do things and people have no idea you're even trying to communicate. What does that mean? Or we're miscommunicating. Again, the key word is appropriateness. What is appropriate and correct for this situation or most meaningful? Appropriateness is the key to communicating well. So, we rarely use one signal system in isolation. No, we don't use them one by one, but we combine them in different ways. And as Dr. Smith tells us, and I've written in Global Arts and Christian Witness book, the total message is the result of the combination of all the signals that are being used and how they combine together. When we use several signals so that they complement each other, more information can be transferred, and the impact of the message is increased dramatically. That means then that different media specialize in using different combinations. We need to be aware of this. Books and newspapers, for example, combine the written and the pictorial communication system. They also employ also the spacing on the page and how broad the columns are and the white space that's all involved. Radio specializes in combining the verbal and the audio. You have music and speaking. Television brings more signal systems to it: pictorial, verbal, audio, and others to a lesser degree. I find that movies, being in a movie theater, watching a movie live in a movie theater where you're surrounded by the olfactory and the optical, you've got popcorn smells, you've got dark lights, you've got a dark, quiet setting with loud music. All of these are combining the signal systems in different ways. And when they're used well, together, then there's room for greater impact. So you could say, if you're having an evangelistic campaign or an event where we are witnessing and are worshiping, They need to be well planned. For them to be well planned, we need to use several media, several signal systems, so that appropriately combine them together well, so that the strength of each reinforces the other, and reinforces all the signal systems. For example, these are well-known statistics that have been out for quite a while, and we know that in the audio, how much do we remember? You see, we just assume, well, if you were there, you knew it. But audio, 70% of what we heard is recalled after 3 hours. What happens? Only 10% is recalled after 3 days. When you have the visual has a higher retention rate. You can picture it in your mind. So 72% is recalled after 3 hours, and look how it increases after 3 days. 20% of the visual is retained, whereas only 10% of the audio is retained. Think about preaching. Okay, now when we combine the audio and the visual together, we see a dynamic exponential increase there, where 85% is recalled after 3 hours, 85% of the message and the content of the event and the experience is recalled, and after 3 days, it's bumped up to 65% of what happened, what took place, is recalled. So after 3 days, that's amazing. And so we want to combine these signals. That's why I think, common discussion points are, well, did you see that movie? And you can remember the movie from having seen it a year ago, or something like that. Black Panther was very important to me, and I'm going to remember that because of its importance and that it was so well done. There are other movies that become very significant to us, and we retain them very well. So here's the key. So we need to combine them well. The second principle or second point is, it is possible for one system to contradict the other systems. This is where it gets sticky. So if you have two systems working well together, but you introduce one system that does not work well, it crosses it out. And this is what causes many misunderstandings in interpersonal communication and in social communication as well. Well, what's going on here? We say that when two or more systems support one another, we believe the message to be sincere. Notice there's attitude there, and there's also emotional levels included. When the signals contradict each other, that's when we believe the person giving the message to be insincere. You know how many people will say, well, he's lying, or boy, she's really truthful. There's something about the way they combine their systems. Now, we want it to be true and genuine, but even if we're being true, but we're misusing the signal systems, and some of them contradict the others, even though we're being honest and genuine, we're coming across as insincere. This causes some very big dilemmas in the communication process. So the principle that is really important for us and helps us in evaluating, analyzing, and shaping communication, shaping worship, shaping how we witness, is that we tend to believe the less consciously used system. Less consciously used system, you say? Yes, that's right. Those systems that are not hard to attain. They just happen. We do it naturally. You see me using the kinesic, and that can contradict anything that comes out of my mouth or what might be written on the paper. So let's look at this. And this is why you see this on your course page even. I want you to have this list. This is the order from the most consciously used signal systems. Verbal is the most obvious. We're very aware of it. When we move into a new culture, we start learning a language. Je parle français, et si vous me comprenez, vous avez beaucoup ensemble de parler et discuter, n'est-ce pas? You can't even get to square one if you don't understand my French. And I speak other languages too. Ich kann auch Deutsch. Nisa wese kumsunguse Kiswahili tu. Jambosana, Habariako, there you go. That's the Kiswahili. But that is only the beginning. It's just the surface level. Then the next most consciously, or least consciously, signal system is the written. Then we have the numeric, the pictorial, the artifactual, the audio, the kinesic, all the ones that we've gone through. These are all 12 of the signal systems. And the more believable signal systems are at the bottom of the list, So spatial, temporal, and olfactory are believed more readily than what is said. So you can see there's all these polar opposites going on, and the combinations are multitudinous, and we need to be aware of how these can be combined. And we can also use these to help us try to analyze when something goes wrong. Well, what happened there? And we can think about it together. Let's think further about it. In fact, this misunderstanding often happens in cross-cultural communication. The communicator, if misusing the systems and there's contradiction, comes across as insincere. Think about it. When we're witnessing to Jesus Christ, we want to be genuine, authentic, honest, and someone that people can trust. But if we're misusing the signal systems, we come across as insincere, and people will not listen to us. This happens in our worship presentations as well. What will suit one audience does not suit the other, and dilemmas set in. Now, principle number 3 talks about how all systems have 2 levels of information, both the rational and the emotional. Some carry more emotional information, others are more heavily rational. The written is heavily rational, but emotional response to writing is nevertheless present. You can get a love letter and boy, your cheeks will heat up, or you'll really sense it in your heart that you are being loved. In some cultures, the message will be believed because it is written or printed, but in other cultures, it will be disbelieved precisely because it is printed. Note how the cultural aspect enters into this and decides whether it's credible or not. And that becomes another dilemma for us. So, spatial, olfactory, and temporal systems carry much emotional information for most cultures. Misuse of space can cause a person's temper to flare without understanding why he or she is becoming angry. And that's the really well-known example is the Latino and the Anglo, and the Latino likes to be close, and the white person has to move away because we want more distance. We want an arm's length distance between us. And the Latino keeps moving in, and it goes like this. I'm not trying to stereotype, it's just a reality. And then pretty soon, the Anglo person is up against the wall, and they keep moving in because we subconsciously move because we have this distance and spatial need that's culturally defined. Okay. Both emotion and reason are necessary in effective communication. All 12 signal systems carry both elements, though the proportion of each in a particular system varies from situation to situation and culture to culture. We interpret them differently. We have acculturated so that we understand them in common and similar ways. Let's just summarize and bring this to a close. There are many things that we can discuss. This is an overview. You'll be working through this more. With the signal systems, you're going to be using them over and over again because I want them to become second nature for you to just work into a default mode. And this is why. We must learn to understand and use these systems effectively for communicating and worshiping our glorious God in Jesus Christ and through the Holy Spirit. So briefly, summarizing, most human communication happens through 12 different systems of signals. Each system is virtually a language in itself with its own vocabulary and grammar. The systems normally reinforce one another, but can also be contradictory. When this happens, it is not only difficult to understand the message, but the messenger seems insincere and people are not willing to listen to you. In fact, you'll find them walking away in disgust. I've seen it happen, unfortunately. So the 12 signal systems, you know what they are: verbal, written, pictorial, on down through. The specific signals used and the meaning assigned to signals vary from culture to cultural. And we're going to be looking at that, experiencing that, observing that in doing our participant observation and doing our worship ethnography. So let me just give you two slides that show you how that summarizes what we're going to be doing in our worship ethnography. We're building up to doing our worship ethnography in the city in Nairobi the Sunday that we are together in town. You're going to want to read C. Michael Hahn's article as really an appendix, guidelines for participant observers. You'll find it in e-reserves. And he talks about the 4 stages of getting ready to do worship ethnography, preparing to do the observation, during the observation, what to do after the observation, and it gives you some guidelines for getting started. And then I've given you a graph here. Here's a chart where you can begin to think about it and do a comparative study. We have you start out by looking at your own church worship and what's going on. That's in week 1 or week 2. You're going to be doing that. And then the new worship style, you're going to be completing that when we're in Nairobi. And ultimately, you can have a comparative analysis and learn and observe and reflect. And the Lord will, hopefully the Lord will speak with you and give us all guidance for how we can join together in bringing Him honor and glory. So that's it for now. May the Lord bless you richly.